alone at her father's birthday party. They called her a disgrace and whispered behind her back. But suddenly, her helicopter appeared in the sky. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and write where you're watching us from. Monica pressed her forehead against the cold bus window as the world rolled by in streaks of dusty fields and crooked power lines, the hum of the engine a steady companion to the thoughts pounding behind her eyes. She clutched the strap of her worn canvas bag with hands that trembled not from the cold, but from the quiet fear that built in her chest with every mile closer to Charlotte. The passing shapes blurred under the gray dawn, and each mile marker felt like a countdown she could not stop, a promise she could not avoid. She shifted in her seat, the upholstery sticking slightly to her skin, the scent of stale coffee and tired bodies thick around her, a reminder that she was coming home the same way she had left, alone, with too much to carry and no one to share the weight. 3 years in New York had hardened her in small, invisible ways. The way she kept her eyes low when strangers brushed past on crowded sidewalks, the way her back tensed when someone spoke too loudly behind her, the way she learned to swallow her hunger with cheap coffee and stale bagels while taking night shifts cleaning offices that glittered with the promise of lives she could not touch. Yet, none of that prepared her for the way her stomach twisted now, imagining the front porch of the house where she had grown up, where laughter had once echoed through warm evenings, where the creak of the screen door used to announce her mother's return from late hospital shifts with tired, loving eyes. In her pocket, she kept her mother's small bronze medallion, the one she wore on a simple chain that used to glint against her dark skin when she bent down to kiss Monica's forehead, whispering, "Be strong, baby. The world will try to break you, but you don't have to let it." Monica had held those words in her bones as she scrubbed floors in skyscrapers, as she listened to women in the shelter sob through the nights, as she learned to stand in rooms where no one wanted her, as she learned to walk away when necessary. Yet today, returning for her father's 75th birthday, she found herself wondering if strength was still enough. The bus rattled to a stop, and the driver's voice announced Charlotte in a dull, practiced tone. Monica stood slowly, feeling the weight of exhaustion pressing down on her shoulders as she stepped off into the bright light of morning. The air smelled of cut grass and warm pavement, a scent that pulled her sharply into memories of childhood summers spent chasing lightning bugs and helping her mother hang laundry on the line while the cicadas hummed their endless song. She pulled her bag closer, taking slow breaths as she began the walk from the bus station, each step towards the neighborhood where her father's house still stood, each step toward the people who would not want her there. The street had not changed much, with its narrow sidewalks cracked by stubborn roots and mailboxes leaning from the weight of too many years. She passed the white houses with their porches and flags fluttering gently in the breeze, hearing dogs bark behind fences and the muted thump of bass from passing cars. Children's bikes lay scattered across driveways, and a group of teenagers lounged under a tree, their laughter floating above the hot pavement. None of it belonged to her, and as she turned the corner to her father's street, her breath caught at the sight of the familiar white house, its paint fresh, the hedges trimmed, the lawn impossibly green under the rising sun. Balloons bobbed from the porch railing, tied in neat clusters of blue and gold, and a large banner stretched above the front steps, proclaiming, "Happy 75th, Daddy." A few cars lined the curb, shining in the light, polished for the occasion, while the laughter of people she had not seen in years spilled from the backyard. Monica stood for a moment, her shoes rooted to the sidewalk as she gripped the strap of her bag, taking in the house that had been both a sanctuary and a prison. She remembered the smell of her mother's cooking, the evenings when her father would lift her onto his shoulders, the quiet way the house settled at night when she was small and everything felt safe. She also remembered the way the rooms fell silent when she entered after her mother died, the way her father's family, her family, had let their smiles slide from their faces as they looked at the skin that reminded them of the choices they wished her father had never made. The front door opened suddenly, and her Aunt Mary stepped onto the porch, her pale hair carefully styled, her dress pressed and bright with floral patterns. Her eyes landed on Monica with a flicker of something sharp before her lips curved into a tight, practiced smile that did not reach her eyes. "Well, look who finally decided to show up," she said, folding her arms as she surveyed Monica from head to toe, her gaze pausing at the frayed edges of Monica's jeans and the scuffed toes of her shoes. Monica swallowed, forcing herself to lift her chin. "Hello, Aunt Mary," she said, her voice steady despite the way her stomach churned. She shifted her weight, clutching the small wrapped box she had carried all the way from New York, a modest gift she had found in a thrift shop, a framed photo of her and her father from her high school graduation, back when she was still invited to family gatherings without whispers following her through the rooms. Aunt Mary stepped aside, gesturing into the house with a sweep of her hand that felt more like a command than a welcome. Monica stepped inside, and the familiar scent of lemon polish and warm bread met her, a smell so painfully comforting it made her eyes burn. Voices floated from the kitchen, laughter rising and falling, a reminder of how long she had been away, how easily the family had continued without her. She moved slowly down the hallway, her eyes catching on the photos that lined the walls, family gatherings, holiday dinners, weddings, and birthdays. She saw her father standing proud with her siblings, her cousins, their families, each frame a snapshot of a life that seemed to exclude her. She paused when she saw a photo from her graduation, the edges of the frame decorated with small, careful shells, her father's proud face beaming as he held her close. Her own face, however, had been covered with a small piece of floral paper, carefully taped over, hiding her smile from the world. She swallowed hard, forcing her feet to keep moving, past the kitchen where women stood stirring pots, past her Uncle Robert, who glanced up from a glass of iced tea and quickly looked away, past the living room where cousins she hadn't seen since they were children sat with their wives, laughing at something on a phone. She heard her name whispered behind her, the sound sharp as a slap, followed by the low murmur of disapproval she had come to recognize so well. She reached the back door and paused, her hand on the cool glass as she looked out over the yard. Tables covered in bright cloths were scattered across the grass, balloons tied to chairs, plates piled high with barbecue and potato salad, glasses glinting in the sun. Children ran barefoot across the lawn, shrieking in delight, while adults sat under umbrellas, fanning themselves and sipping cold drinks. At the head of the largest table, her father sat in a chair that looked too big for his thin frame, his hair silver under the sun, his face lined with age and the softness that had come with it. He wore a light blue shirt, the sleeves rolled up, and his eyes crinkled as he laughed at something someone had said. It was the laugh she remembered, the one that used to ring through the house when he lifted her high in the air, telling her she was his sunshine, his miracle, the best part of his life. Monica pressed her forehead against the glass for a moment, closing her eyes as the weight of the years fell over her like a heavy blanket. 3 years since she had last seen him, 3 years of silence and hurt, of phone calls that ended in shouting or in her own shaking hand lowering the phone before the call could connect. She had written letters, pages filled with words she could not say, explaining why she had left, what she was trying to do, why she could not come home even when she wanted to. Letters that had never been sent, tucked away in a box under her narrow bed in the small room above the laundromat she now called home. She took a breath, straightening her shoulders as she opened the door and stepped outside. The conversations faltered, laughter dying as faces turned toward her, eyes widening, some with surprise, others with thinly veiled annoyance. She felt the weight of every stare, every judgment pressing against her skin like a brand. Her cousin Sarah glanced up, her mouth opening before she quickly looked back at her plate, pretending not to see. Her Uncle Robert's wife, sitting with the fan fluttering at her throat, let her eyes narrow before turning back to the woman beside her, leaning in to whisper behind her hand. Then her father looked up, and for a moment the world stilled. His eyes, so much like her own, dark and warm, softened as they met hers. A slow smile spread across his face, small and hesitant at first, then growing as he pushed himself up from the chair with effort, gripping the armrest to steady himself. Monica felt her throat close, tears burning as she took a step forward, her feet sinking slightly into the soft grass. The small wrapped box trembled in her hands, the ribbon fluttering in the breeze as she moved toward the man who had always seen her as his daughter, even when the world tried to tell them both otherwise. But before she could reach him, her Aunt Mary appeared, stepping between them with a forced laugh that cut through the quiet. "Everyone, look who's finally decided to join us," she announced, her voice bright and cold, her hand resting on Monica's father's arm, as if to hold him back. "We were just about to cut the cake, weren't we, Harold?" Her father's eyes stayed on Monica, his smile faltering as he looked between his sister and his daughter, the lines on his face deepening with the struggle of the moment. Monica stopped a few feet away, clutching the gift to her chest, forcing herself to hold his gaze, to let him see that she was here, that she had come, even if it was too late for everything else. "Happy birthday, Daddy," she said softly, her voice catching as the wind lifted the scent of barbecue and sweet tea around them, carrying the weight of all the words she could not say. And in that moment, as the laughter slowly returned to the yard around them, as the children resumed their games and the adults turned back to their conversations, Monica knew that the hardest part was only beginning. She was home, but it was not her home anymore. It was a place she would have to fight for, a place where she would have to prove herself, not because she was unworthy, but because they had decided long ago that she did not belong. And as she stood there, watching her father's trembling hand reach for her, blocked by the family who claimed to know what was best for him, she felt the strength of her mother's words settle into her bones once more. "The world will try to break you, baby, but you don't have to let it." And Monica knew she wouldn't. Not here, not now, not ever. The scent of grilled meat and sweet tea mixed with the heavy humidity as Monica stood on the edge of the yard, feeling the soft grass beneath her shoes, the air pressing against her skin like a reminder that she did not belong here, no matter how many balloons bobbed from the chairs or how brightly the sun shone over the polished tables. Conversations had returned, but they came with glances that sliced through her like paper cuts, quick and stinging, leaving marks she could not show. She shifted her weight, clutching the small gift against her chest as she watched her father ease himself back into his chair, his eyes flickering to her every few moments, a silent apology that seemed to settle into the lines of his tired face. She wanted to go to him, to kneel beside him and place the gift in his hands, to remind him that she was still his daughter, no matter how many years or miles had tried to wedge themselves between them. But the people around him formed a barrier, their bodies arranged in casual conversation that made it clear she was not welcome to cross. A group of children ran past her, the littlest one squealing as he chased a balloon that had slipped from a chair, and Monica felt a small smile touch her lips before it faded under the weight of the reality she could not ignore. Her cousin Sarah caught her eye briefly, her mouth pressed into a thin line before she looked away, pulling her child closer as if Monica's presence was a warning. Near the table where her father sat, Aunt Mary was laughing too loudly, her hand fluttering in the air as she recounted some story that had the others shaking their heads with polite amusement. Monica's Uncle Robert stood near the grill, turning ribs with practiced ease, smoke rising around him in fragrant clouds that made her stomach tighten with hunger she would not acknowledge. She took a step forward, intending to find a place to sit, to at least show she was not afraid to take up space, but a voice stopped her, low and sharp, coming from her right. "Don't think you can just walk in here and act like you belong," a woman said, her voice familiar in the way it cut, in the way it echoed things Monica had heard her whole life. It was Aunt Mary's daughter, Caroline, her blonde hair pulled back into a neat bun, her sundress bright against her pale skin as she looked Monica up and down with a smirk that barely reached her lips. "This isn't New York. You don't get to play the hero here?" Monica's jaw tightened, but she forced herself to keep her voice calm. "I'm here for my father's birthday, just like everyone else." Caroline let out a small laugh, shaking her head as she turned away. "Right, for his birthday." Her words hung in the air like smoke, clinging to Monica's skin as she finally moved past her, heading toward the smaller table near the side of the yard where the children had abandoned their plates for games, where empty chairs sat near the fence, far enough from the main table to ensure she would not be a part of the conversations that mattered. She placed the gift gently on the table, sliding into one of the plastic chairs that wobbled slightly on the uneven ground, and let her eyes wander over the scene she had once known so well. The yard had been the site of so many memories, birthday parties with cake smeared across small faces, her mother's gentle hands guiding her as she learned to ride a bike, her father's deep laughter ringing out as he chased her through the grass, lifting her into the air as she shrieked with joy. All of it had felt like home once, a place where she was safe, where she was loved, where she was seen. Now it was a stage where she was forced to sit on the edge, an observer in a life that had moved on without her. A plate clattered down in front of her, snapping her from her thoughts, and she looked up to see her cousin's daughter, a girl of about 12, with light brown hair and bright blue eyes that narrowed as she studied Monica. "Mom said I should give you something to eat," the girl said, her voice flat, her gaze dropping to the small chipped plate filled with potato salad and a single piece of chicken. Monica forced a smile, nodding as she murmured her thanks, but the girl only turned on her heel, walking back to her mother with a quickness that made it clear she did not want to linger. The plate felt heavy in Monica's hands as she set it down, her appetite swallowed by the knot in her throat. She pushed the food around with a plastic fork, the laughter from the main table drifting to her like a song she could not sing along to, each burst of amusement punctuating the reminder that she was not a part of their joy, that her presence was a shadow they tolerated only because of the man who sat at the head of the table, the man who still looked at her with love even as he was surrounded by people who wished she would disappear. She could feel the eyes on her, could hear the whispers that rose and fell like a current she could not escape. She thinks she can just come back after all this time. "Did you see what she's wearing?" couldn't even bother to look presentable for her father's birthday. I heard she stole from the family before she left. Harold always was too soft on her, and look where it got him. Each word was a pinprick, small and sharp, leaving her skin buzzing with the effort it took to remain seated, to keep her hands steady, to keep her breathing even. She focused on her father, watching as he smiled at something Uncle Robert said, as he wiped his mouth with a napkin and leaned back in his chair, his eyes scanning the yard until they found her again. He lifted his glass in a small gesture, a toast meant only for her, and Monica felt her lips curve into a smile that was real, if only for a moment, as she lifted her own plastic cup in return. The moment shattered when Aunt Mary's laughter rose again, sharp and clear as she called out, "Well, since we're all here, maybe it's time for the toast." She stood, her bright dress catching the sunlight, her hands clasped in front of her as she beamed at the gathered family, ignoring the way Monica sat at the edge of the yard, her cup still raised, waiting for someone to acknowledge her. To Harold, the best brother, father, and friend anyone could ask for, 75 years and still strong as ever. A chorus of agreement rose, glasses clinking together, smiles all around as the family toasted to the man they all claimed as their own. Monica watched as her father lifted his glass, his eyes on her, the hesitation in his movements clear to her even if no one else noticed. He opened his mouth to speak, but Aunt Mary quickly launched into a story about their childhood, about how Harold had once saved her from falling out of a tree, how he had always been the protector, the strong one, the dependable one. The laughter rose again, stories piling on stories, each memory shared a brick in the wall that stood between Monica and the family that claimed to love him best. She set her cup down, her appetite gone, her hands resting on the small box in front of her, the gift she had brought all the way from New York. She turned it over in her hands, the paper crinkling softly, the ribbon catching the light. It was nothing, really. A thrift store frame with a photo of her and her father on the day she graduated high school, his arm around her shoulders, his face beaming with pride, her own smile wide and bright as she held her diploma. It was a moment that had felt like the promise of everything she had hoped her life would be. A moment before the whispers, before the cold shoulders, before the quiet accusations that followed her everywhere she went. She wanted to give it to him, to remind him of that day, to show him that she remembered, that she still loved him, that she had never stopped being his daughter even when the world around them had tried to convince them both otherwise. But as she watched Aunt Mary take the seat beside him, her hand resting on his arm as she leaned in to speak, as she watched the others gather closer, pulling him into their circle, she felt the distance between them grow, an ocean she could not cross, a wall she could not climb. A small voice broke through her thoughts, and she turned to see the young girl again, standing beside her with wide eyes and a hesitant expression. "Are you really the one who stole Grandma's ring?" the girl asked, her voice quiet, but the words loud enough to draw the attention of those nearby. Heads turning, conversations pausing, the air suddenly thick with the weight of accusation. Monica's breath caught, her hands tightening around the gift as she looked at the child, seeing the reflection of all the things she had fought to leave behind, all the things she could never seem to escape. She opened her mouth to speak, to explain, to tell the truth that no one here wanted to hear, but before she could find the words, Caroline's voice cut through the silence, sharp and cold. "Don't bother, sweetie. Some people can't help who they are." The laughter that followed was soft, uncomfortable, the kind that came when people didn't know what else to do, when the truth was too heavy to hold, and so they let it slide away on a wave of forced amusement. Monica felt the tears burn in her eyes, but she blinked them back, lifting her chin as she looked at the faces turned toward her, at the judgment in their eyes, at the discomfort they tried to hide behind small smiles and averted gazes. She stood, lifting the small box and clutching it to her chest as she stepped away from the table, her feet moving across the grass, past the children who fell silent as she passed, past the adults who pretended not to watch her, past the life she had once imagined she would have. She made her way to the edge of the yard, near the fence, where the shadows were deeper, where the laughter was only an echo, where she could breathe without the weight of their eyes on her. She stood there for a long moment, the gift pressed against her heart, her eyes closed as she tried to gather the strength she would need to continue, to stay, to fight for the right to be here, to be seen, to be acknowledged. She could hear the laughter rise again, the music starting once more, the celebration continuing without her, as it always had, as it always would unless she found the courage to change it. And she would. For him, for herself, for the promise she had made to her mother, for the promise she had made to every woman she had helped, to every child she had comforted, to every version of herself that had ever believed she was worth more than the whispers and the cold stares. She opened her eyes, looking back at the man who had once lifted her into the air and called her his sunshine, seeing the way he watched her now, his eyes soft and sad, filled with all the words he could not say in the middle of a yard full of people who thought they knew him best. Monica nodded once, a promise passing between them, silent and unbreakable, before she turned back to the fence, letting the shadows hold her for a moment longer as she prepared for what would come next. The shadows of the yard were deepening when Monica stepped away from the fence and moved along the edge of the gathering, her body moving on the memory of how to carry herself with dignity even when every glance felt like a needle pressed into her skin. The laughter was softer now, the adults tired from hours in the sun, their plates half finished, conversations shifting from loud stories to quiet complaints about the heat, the grandchildren, the world they no longer understood. Children still darted across the grass with bursts of shrieks that rose and fell like the cicadas hidden in the trees, but even they were slowing down, sticky with sweat and the remains of melted popsicles. Monica paused near the folding table that sagged under the weight of empty dishes, the smell of barbecue clinging to the air, reminding her of summers long past when her mother would stand by the grill with her father, arguing gently about how long the ribs needed, their laughter spilling across the yard in waves that made everything feel safe, possible, good. She reached out, her fingers brushing against a stack of paper napkins, grounding herself in the present as she drew in a slow breath, her eyes scanning the yard for her father. He was seated still, his shoulders stooped, his head bent toward a cousin speaking too close to him, the older man nodding but glancing up every few seconds, his eyes searching for her as they had all afternoon. She could see the way his hands trembled slightly as he lifted his cup to his lips, how he set it down with careful precision as if afraid of the noise it might make, how his gaze would drift away from the conversation, following the path she took as she moved. Her chest tightened with the weight of it, the knowledge that she had stayed away so long, that she had allowed this distance to grow even if she had done it for reasons no one here would ever understand, for choices that had carved pieces out of her until she barely recognized the woman who had left this yard, proud and determined years ago. The memory of New York rose in her mind, unbidden but clear. The long nights in the shelter's narrow hallways, the broken voices of women who came to her with their children, their faces shadowed by fear, bruises fading to yellow, fresh ones blooming purple along their arms. She remembered the way they would flinch at sudden sounds, the way their eyes would dart to the door whenever it opened, waiting for a ghost to come through, for a past they could not outrun. Monica had spent nights curled in a chair outside their doors, a clipboard balanced on her knee, her phone clutched in her hand as she called agencies and hospitals, speaking in a calm voice even when her own fear made her hands shake, even when exhaustion made her vision blur. The money she had taken, the ring they accused her of stealing, had bought that safety. It had paid for the first month's rent on a cramped brownstone where she had set up folding cots, the kitchen filled with canned goods from donations she collected while working 2 shifts scrubbing office floors, her sneakers squeaking against the tiles as she moved from cubicle to cubicle in the dark. The ring, her mother's ring, had been a symbol of a promise her mother had made to her, and Monica had worn it on a chain around her neck every day until the morning she walked into that pawn shop, her fingers cold, her heart pounding as she set it on the counter, the man behind the glass barely glancing at her as he weighed it and named a price. That money had fed children. It had bought formula for a newborn whose mother hid in the back room, terrified to go outside. It had paid for a lawyer to help a young woman file for custody before her abuser found them. It had kept the lights on during a winter so cold Monica could see her breath in the rooms where she slept, wrapped in blankets, her stomach empty, her heart heavy with the weight of every choice she made. She had written letters to her father in those nights, long letters filled with explanations she never found the courage to send. She would sit at the small desk by the window, the sounds of the city, a distant hum, the glow of the street lights casting shadows across the paper as she told him about the women she met, the children who clung to her hand, the way her mother's voice would echo in her mind when she held a frightened girl, whispering, "You're safe now." She wrote about the loneliness that pressed against her bones, the way she missed him, the way she dreamed of the yard, the smell of cut grass, the warmth of his hand on her shoulder. She told him she was sorry, again and again, the words inked onto pages she folded carefully and tucked into the small box she kept in her drawer. Letters that grew dusty with time, waiting for a day when she could place them in his hands. A plate scraped across the table, snapping her from her thoughts, and Monica looked up to see her cousin Caroline standing there, her eyes sharp, her mouth twisted into a smirk that never reached her eyes. "You know, it's rude to stand around staring at people," Caroline said, lifting her drink to her lips, the ice clinking softly. "If you're going to be here, you might as well try to act like you belong." Monica drew in a slow breath, her fingers tightening around the edge of the table as she held Caroline's gaze. "I'm not here for you," she said, her voice low, steady, despite the way her heart pounded in her chest. Caroline laughed, tilting her head back slightly as she glanced over her shoulder toward the table where their family still sat, her father now looking down at his plate, his shoulders hunched. "You think he wants you here?" she asked, her voice dropping as she leaned closer. "You think you can just walk back in after all this time, after everything you've done, and pretend like nothing happened?" Monica's throat tightened, but she forced herself to remain still, to keep her breathing calm as she looked at Caroline. "I'm here because I need to be," she said softly, her words measured, clear. Caroline's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, Monica saw something flicker there, something almost like uncertainty before it was gone, replaced by the coldness she had come to expect. "Whatever you say," Caroline replied, stepping back, her smile returning as she turned away, her laughter joining the others as she rejoined the gathering. Monica let out a slow breath, closing her eyes for a moment before she pushed away from the table, her feet carrying her across the yard to where her father sat, alone now, the plate in front of him barely touched, the cake melting under the warm air. His hands rested on his knees, and when he looked up at her, she saw the exhaustion in his eyes, the softness that came from a lifetime of fighting battles no one saw. "Daddy," she said quietly, the word slipping from her lips, the sound of it pulling his shoulders straighter, his eyes warming as he looked at her. "Monica," he replied, his voice rough, but filled with something that made her chest tighten, something that felt like home. She knelt beside him, placing the small box in his lap, her fingers brushing against his as she let out a shaky breath. "I brought you something," she said, forcing a smile, hoping it would hide the tears that threatened to spill. He looked down at the box, his hands trembling slightly as he lifted it, pulling the ribbon with slow care, peeling back the paper to reveal the frame, the photo of the two of them, frozen in a moment of laughter and light. His breath caught, and he looked at her, his eyes shining as he reached out, his hand cupping her cheek in a gesture so familiar it made her heart ache. "I remember this day," he said softly, his thumb brushing against her skin. "Your mother would have been so proud." "I hope so," Monica whispered, her hand covering his, pressing it against her cheek. Around them, the world moved on, the family laughing, the children playing, the music drifting through the warm air. But in that moment, Monica felt the heaviness of the years lift just enough for her to breathe, for her to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was still a place for her here. She stood slowly, helping him to his feet as he leaned on her arm, his body frail but his spirit strong as he smiled at her. They walked together toward the house, the whispers rising behind them, but she kept her head high, her steps steady, each one a promise to herself, to her mother, to the women she had helped, to the child she had been, who had once believed she could be loved without conditions. Inside, the air was cooler, the hum of the ceiling fan a soft rhythm above them as she guided him to his chair, settling him carefully as he let out a tired sigh. He looked up at her, his eyes filled with gratitude and something else, something unspoken that passed between them like a prayer. "Thank you for coming home," he said, his voice soft but strong. Monica swallowed, nodding as she sat beside him, her hand resting on his, her heart steady as she looked at him, knowing that the hardest part was yet to come, but ready now, for the first time in a long time, to face it. Because she was here. She was home. And she would fight for it, no matter how long it took, no matter how many whispers tried to push her away. She was ready. Monica woke the next morning to the creaking sounds of the house settling and the distant laughter of children already running across the dew-damp yard, the scent of cut grass drifting through the window of the small guest room where she had spent a restless night turning over the voices of the family, the feel of her father's frail hand on hers, the echo of that whispered thank you that felt both like forgiveness and a plea she could not ignore. Sunlight angled across the floorboards in a pale wash, catching on the old dresser and the corners where dust gathered, reminding her how many years had passed since she had walked through this house freely, how many mornings she had left behind while chasing something bigger, something better, something necessary that no one here would ever understand. She sat up slowly, stretching her back as the bed creaked beneath her, the stiffness of sleep lingering in her shoulders, the familiar ache of exhaustion settling in her bones like an old friend. She washed her face in the small bathroom, watching the water swirl in the sink, her reflection in the mirror marked by tired eyes and the determination that lived quietly in the set of her jaw, the way she lifted her chin, the way she refused to look away from herself. She could hear the sounds of the family moving below her, the clatter of dishes, the hum of conversation rising and falling, punctuated by the high shrieks of children, the low murmur of adults pretending everything was fine, pretending this day was just another celebration, pretending they did not see the lines etched in her father's face or the way his steps had slowed, how the strength they had all taken for granted was beginning to falter under the weight of years and the quiet decay of the body. She dressed quickly, pulling on clean clothes she had folded carefully in her bag, running her fingers over the fabric to smooth the creases, pressing her palms against her thighs to still the trembling that started there and worked its way up her spine, a reminder of the fear that never truly left her, no matter how many nights she had survived alone, no matter how many women she had helped to safety, no matter how many times she had stood in front of people who looked at her with disgust and told herself that she would not bow. Downstairs, the kitchen was filled with the warm scent of biscuits and bacon, the coffee brewing in thick clouds of steam, the small radio on the counter playing a gospel station softly, the music drifting between the conversation and the scrape of chairs. Monica paused in the doorway, her eyes sweeping over the room, taking in the familiar shape of her aunt's shoulders as she leaned over the stove, the quiet chatter of cousins bent over, their coffee, the children sitting on the floor with plates balanced on their knees, crumbs scattered across the tiles, laughter bursting out in small, bright moments that made the air feel alive. Her father sat at the table, his back straight, his hands wrapped around a cup of coffee, his eyes finding her the moment she stepped into the room, and for a moment, everything else faded away, leaving only the soft warmth of that gaze, the way his lips lifted in a tired but genuine smile, the way his shoulders relaxed, as if her presence alone was enough to ease the burden he carried. "Morning, sunshine," he said, his voice rough from sleep, but threaded with affection that pulled at something deep inside her, something that had been starved for far too long. "Morning, Daddy," she replied, moving to his side, pressing a gentle kiss to the top of his head before she settled into the chair beside him, her hand reaching out to cover his where it rested on the table, the warmth of his skin grounding her, reminding her why she had come back, reminding her what was at stake. Breakfast passed in a blur of conversation she only half heard, her attention fixed on her father as he ate slowly, carefully, pausing often to catch his breath, his hands trembling slightly as he lifted the cup to his lips, his eyes closing for a moment as if the effort of holding it steady was too much. She spoke softly to him, reminding him to drink water, to take small bites, to rest when he needed, ignoring the glances that came from across the table, the quiet disapproval from those who saw her care as interference, who saw her presence as disruption. When the plates were cleared and the children rushed outside, the adults followed, carrying pitchers of sweet tea and lemonade, plates of watermelon and cookies, the yard filling with the hum of summer, the bright laughter of children chasing each other across the grass, the soft music from the speakers set on the porch, blending with the rustle of leaves in the warm breeze. Monica stayed close to her father, helping him settle into a chair beneath the shade of the old oak tree, adjusting the cushion behind his back, placing a glass of water within his reach, her movements calm and steady, ignoring the way Caroline rolled her eyes from where she stood with her arms crossed, ignoring the way Aunt Mary's lips pressed together as she whispered to Uncle Robert, ignoring the glances that passed between cousins as they shifted uncomfortably, unwilling to say what they all thought, that she was overstepping, that she was making herself too visible, that she was reminding them of things they did not want to see. The air was thick with heat, the sun bright in the sky, the celebration moving around them in waves of conversation and laughter that rose and fell, the smell of grilling meat mingling with the scent of fresh-cut grass, the colors of balloons bobbing in the breeze, the sharp clink of ice against glass as drinks were poured and passed around. Monica watched her father, the way his eyes followed the children, the small smile that touched his lips as he watched them play, the quiet sigh that escaped him as he leaned back in his chair, his hand drifting to his chest for a moment, pressing there as if to steady something that fluttered beneath his ribs. She moved to his side, her hand brushing against his shoulder as she leaned down, her voice low and gentle. "Are you okay, Daddy?" He opened his eyes, looking up at her with that same tired smile, shaking his head slightly as if to dismiss her concern. But she saw the way his fingers pressed harder against his chest, the way his breath came a little quicker, the way the color drained from his face. "Just a little tired," he whispered, his voice strained, his eyes closing again as he let out a slow breath. Monica straightened, her eyes scanning the yard, searching for Aunt Mary, for Uncle Robert, for anyone who might help. But they were laughing near the grill, their attention elsewhere, their voices loud in the summer air, oblivious to the quiet moment unfolding beneath the tree. She knelt beside him, her hands moving with calm urgency, pressing 2 fingers against his wrist, feeling for the pulse that fluttered weakly there, counting the beats as she watched his face, the lines of pain that creased his forehead, the way his lips parted as he tried to draw in air that did not seem to come. "Daddy, I need you to breathe with me," she said, her voice steady, her eyes locked on his, willing him to focus, to fight, to stay. But his eyes rolled back, his body slumping forward, the glass of water tipping from the small table, spilling across the grass as his hand fell away from his chest, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps that tore through the air like a scream she could not hear. "Help! Someone help!" Monica's voice broke through the laughter, cutting across the yard like a blade, freezing the smiles, stopping the conversations as heads turned, eyes widening as they took in the sight of her kneeling beside her father, her hands on his shoulders, her voice rising in panic as she called out again, "Call 911, now!" She lowered him gently to the ground, her hands moving to his chest, her fingers finding the rhythm as she began compressions, counting under her breath, blocking out the gasps, the whispers, the rush of feet across the grass as people crowded closer, their faces pale, their eyes wide, their voices a low hum of fear and disbelief. "Move back! Give me space!" she shouted, her arms steady as she pressed down, counting the beats, watching for the rise of his chest, the flicker of his eyelids, the sign that he was coming back to her, that he was still fighting. Someone was on the phone, their voice high and shaking as they spoke to the dispatcher, giving the address, describing the scene, their words blending into the background as Monica focused on the rhythm, on the breath that refused to come, on the heartbeat that slipped beneath her hands. Time stretched, a slow, agonizing crawl as she fought for him, her breath coming in sharp gasps, sweat dripping down her back, her arms burning with the effort, her mind screaming with fear even as her face remained calm, her voice steady, the count never faltering as she pressed down again and again and again. Then, in the distance, a sound rose, low at first, then louder, the rhythmic thump of rotor blades cutting through the summer air, growing closer, a shadow passing over the yard as the helicopter came into view, circling once before lowering toward the open space near the fence, the downdraft whipping the grass, sending balloons skittering across the yard, lifting the tablecloths, pulling at hair and clothes as people shielded their faces, their voices rising in shock and fear. Monica did not look up, did not pause, did not stop, her hands pressing down, her voice counting, her eyes on her father's face as the helicopter landed. The medical team jumping out, moving quickly, efficiently, the stretcher rolling across the grass as they approached, their voices calm but urgent as they spoke to her, asking questions, checking pulses, preparing equipment. She moved back as they took over, her hands falling to her sides, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps as she watched them work, her vision blurring with tears she refused to let fall, her body shaking with the effort of holding herself together as they lifted him onto the stretcher, securing the straps, adjusting the oxygen mask, checking monitors that beeped in sharp, steady rhythms. She followed as they moved toward the helicopter, ignoring the whispers that rose behind her, ignoring the questions, the accusations, the fear in the voices of her family as they called after her, ignoring the way Caroline shouted, "What have you done?" Ignoring the way Aunt Mary sobbed, her hands pressed to her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. Monica climbed into the helicopter, taking the seat beside the stretcher, her hand finding her father's, gripping it tightly as the doors closed, the world outside muffled by the roar of the engines, the vibration of the blades, the sharp scent of antiseptic and fuel filling the air as the ground fell away, the yard shrinking beneath them, the faces of her family turning upward, their eyes following as she rose into the sky, her father beside her, fighting for breath, fighting for life, fighting to stay. She leaned close, her voice low and steady, her lips near his ear as she whispered, "Hold on, Daddy. I'm here. I've got you. Don't let go." And as the helicopter carried them away, the world below growing smaller, the horizon stretching out before them in a wash of blue and gold, Monica closed her eyes, letting the tears fall at last, her hand holding his, her heart steady, her mind clear, ready for whatever came next, ready to fight, ready to save him, ready to face the truth that would follow them, ready to finish what she had come home to do. The rhythmic hum of the helicopter's blades pressed against Monica's ears as she stared at her father's face, pale under the harsh cabin light, the oxygen mask fogging slightly with each shallow breath. The paramedic beside him adjusted the lines and checked the readings with a calm efficiency that seemed to clash with the roar of the wind and the muted thunder of the rotors. The stretcher was strapped firmly to the floor, and Monica sat with her seatbelt tight, but she leaned forward, one hand gripping the metal edge of the stretcher, the other wrapped around her father's cold hand, pressing it gently as if her touch could anchor him to this world while the earth fell away beneath them. Through the small window, the city stretched below in a quilt of roofs and roads, trees and water glinting under the midday sun, but Monica could not see it, could not let herself look away from the rise and fall of his chest, the slight movement that proved he was still with her, still fighting despite the exhaustion that lined his features, the sweat that dotted his temple, the faint tremor in his fingers when they curled weakly around hers for a single moment before falling still again. She kept whispering to him, telling him he was okay, that she was there, that she would not leave him, that she would fight for him as long as it took. Her words threading through the mechanical sounds of the cabin, a small, stubborn defiance against the fear tightening in her chest. When they landed on the hospital's rooftop pad, the doors opened with a rush of hot air, and the city's noise rushed in. The horns, the hum of traffic, the distant wail of another siren, and the paramedics moved quickly, rolling the stretcher down the ramp with practiced hands, calling ahead on radios, voices clipped but urgent. Monica followed, the heat of the concrete radiating through her shoes as she kept her eyes on her father, her hand brushing against the stretcher's rail as they wheeled him into the bright white corridors of the emergency department, the air inside sharp with antiseptic, cold against her damp skin. Nurses and doctors gathered, reading charts, adjusting monitors, working around her as if she was invisible, and for a moment she let herself step back, pressing her hands to her face, the reality of the moment sinking into her bones like ice. She felt the weight of every year she had been gone, every phone call she had missed, every letter she had never sent, pressing down on her shoulders, a crushing reminder that for all her fight, all her sacrifice, she could not stop the fragile clock inside her father's body from ticking down, from reminding her that even the strongest love could not hold back the truth of time. But she would not leave. She would not run. She moved to the waiting area as they worked, sitting down on a hard chair, her back straight, her hands folded in her lap to keep them from shaking as she stared at the swinging doors, waiting for news, for any sign that he would open his eyes and call her sunshine again. The minutes stretched, each one an eternity, the bustle around her a blur of movement and color she could not focus on, her mind caught between memory and fear, between the promise she had made to her mother and the reality she now faced. She remembered nights in New York, sitting in a cramped office with paperwork spread across a battered desk, the sound of sirens outside, the hush of women's voices in the next room as they settled their children on thin mattresses, the quiet moments when Monica allowed herself to breathe, to remember that she was doing what needed to be done, that she was helping even if it cost her everything else. She remembered pressing a hand to her own chest, feeling her heart beat, reminding herself she was alive, that she was enough, that her mother's spirit was with her in those small victories, in every woman who took her child's hand and stepped into a safer tomorrow. That strength returned now, threading through her spine as she sat in that hospital waiting room, the air conditioning humming above, the quiet beep of machines from nearby rooms marking the passage of time. She would not be afraid, she told herself, would not let the past dictate the present, would not let the whispered judgments of her family diminish the truth she carried, the truth she had earned with every sleepless night, every bruise on her palms from scrubbing floors, every dollar she had saved by skipping meals so she could send money to keep the shelter's lights on, to pay for medicine, to pay for freedom for women who had nothing else. When the doctor finally came, a tall woman with tired eyes and a calm voice, Monica stood before she could speak, her heart in her throat, her hands clenching at her sides. The doctor gave a small nod, an encouraging smile that did not reach her eyes. He was stable, she said, but weak, and the episode had been serious. He was asking for Monica, the doctor explained, and Monica followed her down the hallway, her shoes whispering across the linoleum, her breath catching as she stepped into the room where he lay, pale against the white sheets, tubes and wires connected to machines that clicked and hissed softly in the quiet. His eyes opened when she stepped in, and he tried to smile, the effort visible in the way his lips trembled, in the moisture that gathered in the corners of his eyes. Monica moved to him, taking his hand in both of hers, lowering herself to sit at his bedside, letting her thumb brush over the back of his hand as she blinked back tears. "I'm here, Daddy," she whispered, leaning closer so he could hear, so he could see her, so he would know that she had not left him. "I knew you would be," he rasped, his voice rough but clear enough to send a warmth through her chest, a small flame of hope that she held tightly as she nodded, squeezing his hand gently. The nurses stepped out to give them privacy, and for a moment, the world was quiet. The machine's steady rhythms the only sound as Monica rested her forehead against the edge of the bed, her eyes closed, her breath steadying as she allowed herself to simply exist in this moment, to feel the rise and fall of his breath, to let the past slip away for a single, precious moment of peace. But the quiet did not last. The door opened again, and voices filled the room. Caroline's sharp tones, Aunt Mary's worried murmurs, the deeper voices of uncles and cousins, their faces drawn with fear and suspicion, their eyes darting to Monica with questions unspoken, their presence a reminder of the world waiting outside this room, the world that would not let her remain invisible any longer. "What happened?" Caroline demanded, stepping forward, her arms crossed over her chest, her eyes narrowing as she looked from Monica to her father. "Why were you even with him when this happened? What were you doing?" Monica stood slowly, turning to face her cousin, her chin lifting as she met her gaze, refusing to shrink, refusing to let the anger rising in Caroline's voice break the calm she had fought so hard to build. "I was helping him," she said simply, her voice quiet but strong, letting the truth of those words settle in the air between them. Aunt Mary stepped forward, her hands twisting together, her eyes flicking to her brother in the bed before returning to Monica, her voice trembling. "We just want to understand, Monica. You come back after all these years and now this happens. You can't expect us not to have questions." Monica took a deep breath, feeling the weight of their stares, the sharpness of their judgment pressing against her skin. But she did not flinch, did not look away. "I understand," she replied, her fingers brushing against her father's hand as she glanced down at him, seeing the way his eyes followed her, the quiet trust there, the unspoken support that gave her the courage to continue. "And I will answer your questions, all of them. But not here, not now." Caroline scoffed, shaking her head, but Aunt Mary laid a hand on her arm, stopping her from speaking, her eyes never leaving Monica's face. "All right," she said softly, her voice calm despite the tension in the room. "Later." They left the room one by one, leaving Monica and her father alone again, the quiet settling once more as she sat beside him, letting her fingers find his, letting her breath match the slow rise and fall of his chest as she whispered to him about the day ahead, about the promises she intended to keep, about the truth she would finally tell, no matter the cost. Outside the window, the city moved on, the streets alive with people unaware of the small room above them where a woman held her father's hand and prepared to change the course of her family's story, to break the silence that had kept them apart, to reclaim the place she had earned not with words but with actions, with sacrifices made in the dark, with a love that had never wavered, even when the world tried to bury it. And in that quiet, Monica knew that when the whispers came, when the accusations rose, when the past collided with the present in a storm of words and tears, she would be ready to face it, to stand her ground, to tell the truth that had been waiting too long to be heard. Because she was here now. Because she had come home. Because she had something worth fighting for. And she would not let it go. The hall outside her father's hospital room was silent in the soft, sterile light of dawn, the waxed floor glinting beneath the humming fluorescent lamps. Monica stood by the window, watching the city below awaken, headlights threading through early morning mist, coffee carts rattling along sidewalks, people moving with the urgency of a day that was still theirs to shape. She pressed a hand against the glass, feeling the coolness seep into her palm as she drew a breath, her reflection staring back at her, eyes shadowed by exhaustion but clear, steady, determined. Behind her, the door clicked open, and her father's soft murmur floated to her. She turned to see him propped up against the pillows, his eyes open, tracking her movement with that quiet, constant love that had never failed her, even when words were scarce, even when distance made their conversations nothing more than brief, stilted phone calls or the silence that had stretched over the years like a chasm. She returned to his side, settling into the chair and taking his hand, feeling the bones beneath his skin, the way his fingers curled slowly around hers, a deliberate, fragile movement that anchored them both. The machines around him beeped softly, measuring each breath, each heartbeat, a rhythm that became a background to the words forming in her mind, pressing at the back of her throat, waiting to be released. He squeezed her hand gently, urging her to speak. "Daddy," she began, her voice low, firm, the calm tone she had learned to use in the shelter when frightened women needed reassurance, when children needed to believe the world could be safe again, when she herself needed to remember that fear did not have the final say. "They're going to come soon. Aunt Mary, Caroline, all of them. They want to know what happened. They want to know why I came back." His eyes held hers, and she saw understanding there. The acceptance that the family, with their suspicions and whispered accusations, would not rest until they had their explanations, until they could find something to blame, someone to blame for the fracture in their perfect image of themselves. He nodded once, slow, but his lips quirked into a faint, tired smile, the same one he had given her when she was a child terrified of thunderstorms, when he told her the thunder was just the sky reminding the world it was alive. "Tell them, Monica," he whispered, his voice a rasp but filled with quiet authority. "Tell them the truth." She exhaled, pressing his hand to her forehead briefly before standing, squaring her shoulders as she moved to the door, opening it to find them gathered in the hallway, a cluster of anxious, expectant faces. Aunt Mary stood at the front, her hands folded over her purse, eyes puffy from crying, but sharp with determination. Caroline was beside her, arms crossed, lips thin with suspicion, eyes darting to Monica's face and away again. Behind them, uncles and cousins waited, their conversations cut off by the sound of the door opening, the hush that fell over them charged with all the words they had rehearsed in whispers. "They want answers," Aunt Mary said, her voice trembling but clear, stepping forward slightly, not into the room, but standing at the threshold as if afraid of crossing into a space she did not understand. Monica nodded, stepping back to let them enter, watching as they gathered at the foot of her father's bed, eyes shifting from her to him, to the machines that beeped and clicked steadily, reminding them all of the fragility of the man they loved, the man they judged her for leaving, for betraying, in their eyes, when she disappeared to New York, taking with her the last piece of the family's fragile unity. She stood at the end of the bed, her hands folded in front of her, letting the silence stretch until they were all looking at her, waiting, the discomfort on their faces proof of how little they wanted the truth, even as they demanded it. "I know you've all had questions," she began, her voice steady, the words coming without hesitation because she had spoken them 1,000 times in the quiet of her small room in New York, to herself, to the memory of her mother, to the reflection in a cracked bathroom mirror while exhaustion and purpose battled in her bones. "You've made assumptions, you've whispered, you've believed what you wanted to believe because it was easier than asking, easier than hearing the truth." Caroline scoffed, shifting her weight, but Aunt Mary shot her a look, silencing her as Monica continued, her gaze never leaving the faces in front of her. You think I left because I didn't care, because I was too focused on myself, on money, on some life you couldn't understand, she said, her voice low, calm, but each word heavy, deliberate, landing with the weight of every sacrifice she had made in the darkness while they lived comfortably in the glow of their denial. You think I stole from this family, that I took what wasn't mine and ran away to build a life you could hate because it was easier to hate me than to face what was really happening. A murmur ran through them, uncomfortable shifting, eyes glancing away, some filled with confusion, others with anger. But she pressed on, refusing to stop, refusing to soften the edges of her truth to comfort their illusions. I took the ring, she said clearly, letting the words hang in the air, watching as Aunt Mary's eyes widened, as Caroline's lips parted in a triumphant smirk that was quickly wiped away by the next words. I took it because I had to sell it to keep the doors open at the shelter, to buy medicine for a child with a fever so high her mother thought she would die, to pay for the lawyer who helped a woman get custody of her children before her abusive husband could find them again, to pay for food when donations dried up, to pay the electricity bill so the women and children who came to us didn't have to sleep in the dark, afraid. The silence that followed was thick, broken only by the steady beep of the monitors and the quiet hum of the air conditioning. Monica let it stretch, let them sit with the reality of her words, with the knowledge that the narrative they had clung to was unraveling, that their certainty was cracking under the weight of the truth. I worked 3 jobs, she continued, her voice softer now but no less firm. I cleaned offices at night. I worked in a diner in the mornings. I did everything I could to keep that place running, because it was the only home some of those women and their children had. I lived in a room above a laundromat because it was all I could afford, while every dollar I made went back to them. Tears slipped down Aunt Mary's cheeks as she shook her head, but she did not speak. Caroline's arms dropped to her sides, her fingers twisting into the fabric of her shirt as her eyes darted to Monica and away, unable to hold the weight of her gaze. I didn't come back because I wanted to prove something to you, Monica said, her voice catching slightly as she glanced at her father, seeing the tears in his eyes, the pride there, the relief that the truth was finally spoken. I came back because he's my father, and I love him, and I will not let him fight alone. I came back because I'm still family, whether you accept it or not. For a long moment, no one moved. The air was thick with the heavy breathing of those who had been holding it, the soft sobs of Aunt Mary, the sharp sniff of an uncle wiping his eyes quickly, pretending it was nothing. Caroline sank into the chair at the foot of the bed, her head dropping into her hands, her shoulders shaking as silent tears fell from her eyes. Tears of shame, of regret, of the sudden, crushing realization that everything she had believed, everything she had used to judge Monica, was a lie. Monica took a deep breath, her eyes sweeping over the room, taking in the brokenness, the discomfort, the softening of faces as they saw her not as the villain they had made her, but as a daughter, a woman who had carried burdens they had not wanted to see. I am not asking for your forgiveness, she said, her voice soft but strong, the quiet power of truth wrapping around each word. I'm asking for your understanding. I'm asking you to see me for who I am, not who you decided I was. Her father reached out, his hand trembling as he found hers, gripping it tightly, pulling her closer until she was beside him, his arm wrapping around her shoulders as he pulled her into a gentle embrace, pressing his forehead against hers, tears sliding down his cheeks as he whispered, I see you, sunshine. I see you, and I am so proud of you. She closed her eyes, letting the tears fall freely now, the tension in her shoulders easing as she leaned into him, allowing herself to be held, to be loved without condition, without judgment, without the weight of expectation crushing the breath from her lungs. Around them, the family watched, their own tears falling, the walls of resentment and misunderstanding beginning to crumble as the truth settled between them, heavy but necessary, painful but freeing. Monica knew it would take time, that the wounds of the past would not heal overnight, that forgiveness was a process, that trust would have to be rebuilt one moment at a time. But for the first time in years, it felt possible. In the quiet that followed, with her father's arm around her and the family gathered, broken but together, Monica allowed herself to believe that they could find a way forward, that the truth could set them free, that love, imperfect and hard-won, could be enough to build something new, something stronger, something real. And as the morning light poured into the room, touching the faces of those she loved, Monica knew she was exactly where she needed to be. The scent of the hospital's clean corridors lingered on Monica's clothes as she helped her father step carefully down the ramp to the waiting transport van, the warm morning air pressing gently against her skin. She could feel the tremor in his hand, the careful, deliberate way he moved, each step a reminder of his fragility, each breath a quiet victory in a body that had weathered the years and now demanded rest. The family gathered around, their faces softer, eyes meeting hers without the hardness that had once shadowed every glance, their hands reaching out to steady him as he lowered himself into the seat belt clicking in place, the small, relieved sigh that escaped him as he leaned back and closed his eyes for a moment. Monica took her place beside him, holding his hand, anchoring them both as the van pulled away from the curb, the hospital shrinking behind them, replaced by the rolling streets of the neighborhood they had known all their lives. Outside the window, the city passed in streaks of sunlight and shadow, storefronts opening for the day, children skipping along the sidewalks with backpacks bouncing against small shoulders, neighbors waving as they swept their porches, the simple, everyday rhythms of a world that continued to turn regardless of the pain and healing happening within it. Her father opened his eyes, turning his head slightly to look at her, the corners of his mouth lifting in a soft, tired smile that reached his eyes, the warmth there a balm that settled in her chest, reminding her why she had come back, why she had fought to stay, why she had told the truth even when her voice trembled. They pulled into the driveway slowly, the van pausing as family members hurried forward, opening the door, extending careful hands to help him down, guiding him toward the house. The balloons from the party still bobbed weakly in the breeze, their colors faded, the edges beginning to crinkle under the sun's persistent heat, but they remained, a reminder of celebration, of survival, of the fragile but unbroken bond of family that had been tested and had endured. Monica walked beside him, one hand lightly on his back, the other steadying his arm as he climbed the porch steps, pausing to catch his breath, his eyes scanning the familiar yard, the tree that had once shaded summer picnics, the patch of grass where he had taught her to ride a bike, the corner where her mother used to stand with her coffee, watching over them with a smile that lingered in memory. Inside the house, the air was cool, carrying the scent of lemon polish and freshly brewed coffee, the quiet hum of the refrigerator blending with the distant laughter of children playing in the yard. The family moved with quiet purpose, preparing the living room with pillows and a soft blanket, settling him into his favorite chair by the window where the morning light poured in, illuminating the lines on his face, the silver in his hair, the calm in his eyes as he looked around at the family gathered, the weight of unspoken words hanging between them, the promise of forgiveness and rebuilding flickering softly in the warm air. Monica moved through the house, her hands brushing against the familiar surfaces, the photographs on the walls now seen with new eyes, each one a fragment of the life they had shared, the life she had fought to protect in ways they had never known, ways they were only beginning to understand. She found herself pausing before a photograph of her mother, the frame slightly crooked, the glass reflecting the light as she reached out to straighten it, her fingers tracing the outline of the woman who had taught her what strength looked like, what sacrifice meant, what love demanded. Aunt Mary entered the room quietly, her steps hesitant, her eyes soft as they met Monica's, the tension that had once stiffened her posture now replaced by something gentler, something closer to the love they had shared when Monica was a child, sitting on her lap, listening to stories while her mother worked late shifts at the hospital. "He's asking for you," Aunt Mary said softly, her voice catching slightly as she reached out to touch Monica's arm, the gesture unsteady but real, a beginning of something neither of them could yet name. Monica nodded, following her back into the living room where her father waited. The family gathered around him, the children sitting cross-legged on the floor, their eyes wide and attentive, sensing the weight of the moment even if they did not fully understand it. He beckoned her closer, his hand lifting with effort, and she moved to his side, kneeling beside him, her hand finding his, their fingers intertwining as he turned to look at the family, his voice soft but clear as he spoke. "This house has seen many things," he began, his eyes scanning the faces before him, resting for a moment on each of them, the weight of his love evident in the way his gaze softened, the way his lips lifted in small, tired smiles. "It has seen laughter and tears, arguments and forgiveness, goodbyes and homecomings. It has held us all, even when we did not know how to hold each other." His hand tightened around Monica's, his eyes turning to her, the pride in them unspoken but shining as he nodded once, a small, deliberate gesture that felt like a blessing. "Monica has shown us what it means to love without asking for anything in return, to give without expecting praise, to fight for family even when family doesn't understand." Tears slipped down Aunt Mary's cheeks, her hand pressed to her mouth as she nodded, her eyes meeting Monica's, holding her gaze with a quiet apology that did not need words. Caroline wiped her eyes quickly, her head dropping as she took a shaky breath, her arms wrapping around her middle as if to steady herself against the emotions she could no longer hide behind sharp words. Monica's father continued, his voice growing softer but no less strong. "This house will always be yours, Monica. This family will always be yours. And it is time we all start acting like it." A murmur of agreement moved through the family. Small nods, hands reaching out to touch shoulders, to hold hands, to offer silent support as the weight of years of misunderstandings, of judgments, of harsh words began to lift, replaced by something softer, something truer, something that felt like hope. As the morning moved toward afternoon, the family gathered in the kitchen, preparing a meal together, the clatter of dishes blending with the low hum of conversation, the laughter of children now light and easy as they moved through the rooms, carrying plates and napkins, their voices filling the house with the sound of life returning. Monica moved among them, accepting the small gestures of reconciliation, the smiles that were hesitant but genuine, the touches on her arm, the soft words of gratitude for truths finally spoken, for the sacrifices they were only beginning to understand. Later, as the sun began to lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the porch where they had gathered to eat together, Monica sat beside her father, their plates balanced on their laps, the sounds of the family around them a soft, comforting background to the quiet conversation they shared. He spoke of her mother, of the dreams they had built together, of the ways he had failed and the ways he had tried to make up for those failures, of the pride he felt in the woman Monica had become, of the gratitude he felt for the love she had shown, for the strength she had carried when he could not. Monica listened, her hand resting on his arm, her heart steady as she allowed herself to take in his words, to let them heal the wounds she had carried for so long, to let them remind her that love, even imperfect, even tested, was worth the fight, was worth the return, was worth the promise she had made to herself and to her mother long ago. As the evening settled, the children running through the yard with fireflies dancing around them, the family gathering blankets and cups of coffee, settling into chairs as the stars began to appear, Monica stood, walking to the edge of the porch, looking out over the yard that had once been her world, the place she had left, the place she had returned to, the place she now knew she would never truly leave again. She felt her father's presence beside her, his hand finding hers, his voice low as he spoke. "You brought us home, Monica." She turned to him, her eyes meeting his, the stars reflected there as she smiled, the warmth in her chest steady, strong, unbroken. "We brought each other home," she replied, her voice soft but certain, the truth of it settling between them as they turned back to watch the family, the laughter, the quiet, steady hum of love that filled the air, the promise of tomorrow carried on the soft summer breeze. And as the stars brightened above them, as the house behind them glowed with the soft light of lamps and the warmth of shared spaces, Monica knew she was exactly where she was meant to be. The circle of family around her no longer a place of judgment, but of healing, of forgiveness, of a love that had endured the distance, the years, the pain, and had emerged stronger, truer, and real. She was home. If you found this story meaningful, don't forget to subscribe for more. Check out our other videos for more stories like this, and share this video with someone